On January 8, 2005, when a renowned diver attempts to dive one of the deepest freshwater caverns in the world to find and return the remains of a fallen diver, he and his team expect to undertake the greatest challenge of his career. But despite a strict preparation plan, a simple error leads to fatal consequences. This is the story of the Bushmans Hole incident. In the heart of South Africa's Northern Cape lies a mysterious and otherworldly formation known as Bushman's Gat, or Bushman's Hole. This submerged freshwater formation, one of the largest in the world, is hidden beneath a seemingly mundane surface of dillweed and plunges to depths up to a staggering 282.6 meters or 927 feet, where any and all light is swallowed by a never-ending void of water. Until this point being natural wonder and casual swimming hole, its exploration history is marked by milestones of human achievement under crippling pressure and in spite of the risks involved. With the hole resting at an altitude of over 1,500 meters or 4,921 feet above sea level, there's an additional layer of complexity added to the already dangerous recreation of cave diving. The atmosphere demanding the human body work leagues harder for a simple breath of air and withstand the abnormally dense water pressure due to its location. As a result, unparalleled skill and preparation from those who wish to dive into its cold, dark waters is absolutely necessary. Fortunately, for daredevils like intrepid Australian pilot and experienced scuba diver and technical David Shaw, while Bushman's Hole presented a significant challenge, it was nothing he couldn't handle. In fact, on October 28, 2004, Shaw would embark on his first technical dive into Bushman's Hole for the express purpose of challenging the status quo and breaking multiple previous diving records with his own feats. Ultimately, his efforts and long preparation time would prove successful as he broke each of the 4 records on a single dive: depth on a rebreather, depth in a cave on a rebreather, depth on a line, and depth at altitude on a rebreather. The dive itself lasted almost 10 hours non-stop, with an entire team and a host of specific equipment at the ready, with Shaw descending to a depth of 270 meters or 885 feet. After confirming he'd achieved what he'd set out to do, Shaw decided to return to the surface with newfound pride and excitement. However, before he did, he caught eye of something unbelievable hiding within the silt of the cavern bottom. A pile of bones laying in a wet suit. The remains of Dion Dryer. Dion Dryer was a South African recreational diver, and much like Shaw, was known for being completely elated at taking risks and doing things no ordinary recreational diver would do. With 200 dives under his belt, he was experienced and competent in what he loved to do. By 1994, he was what one could call a paragon of the spirit of diving, driven to make his own mark in the community and the world with time and age on his side, being only 20 at the time. So, when he was invited by the South African Cave Diving Association, SACDA, to explore Bushman's Hole over the Christmas holiday, he was completely head over heels with excitement and jumped at the opportunity immediately. Dion and the team from SACDA planned to descend approximately 150 meters into the cave with the date set for December 17, 1994. However, 2 weeks before the dive was set to take place, life would throw a curveball Dion's way. Not long after the date had been set, Dion's grandfather had passed away, leaving him and his family in deep mourning and grief for their lost elder. Later, while sitting around a campfire with relatives and reflecting on the times had and memories shared, Dion made a definitive statement, which ended up being a case of poetic irony so relevant that it's almost divine intervention. Speaking honestly and candidly, his father Theo recalls him as having said, "If I had a choice of how to go out in life, I'd like to go out diving." Unfortunately for this bright young man, the universe would grant him that very fate. 2 weeks passed and the day for the dive came. Dion Dryer and his team members arrived to perform a practice dive prior to the scheduled technical dive, which had been coordinated and established by Nuno Gomes for later that week. Everyone descended, and at first, everything went without any issues. The team would explore the deep pit in the earth and then later ascend to reconvene and perform all necessary checks and balances. However, upon doing a head count, they realized Dion was missing. The team would frantically dive back into the water, searching and searching for him tirelessly. However, to maintain their own safety, they would inevitably be forced to return to the surface with no further action being possible. Dion Dryer was lost. The team would come to the collective conclusion that Dion went missing at about 50 meters from the surface during his ascent, very close to safety, yet still far away enough to pose a danger. The likely answer for how and why he'd gone missing was either loss of consciousness or hypocapnia, caused by the increased amount of work required to breathe at that depth. Hypercapnia itself being a condition of the environment where too much carbon monoxide enters the victim's bloodstream. Knowing how deadly carbon monoxide is on the surface when entering the lungs, one can easily piece together how succumbing to bloodstream poisoning underwater would be fatal. After 2 weeks, Dion Dryer was officially presumed dead. His father would later hire a remote submersible to explore the area without risk to anyone's safety to look for any remains or at least signs as to what had happened. After descending with much of nothing being found, they'd discover something that hadn't been caught before. It was Dion's diving helmet lying partially buried in the floor of the cavern, yet Dion's body itself was still nowhere to be found. With the family and search team having never found anything more, our story is brought back to October 28, 2004, with David Shaw at the bottom of the cavern staring at the lifeless remains of Dion Dryer, finally found. David Shaw was enamored, haunted, and simultaneously heartbroken to find the body at such a low depth, to discover a fellow diver resting at the bottom of Bushman's Hole. There was only one call he could make: carry his fallen fellow diver to the surface if possible, and see if the remains could be returned to any locatable loved ones. However, with the body being little more than a mostly intact skeleton embedded in the thick, sludge-like mud and silt, he realized that his current supply of oxygen wouldn't be enough to both complete the task and get him back to the surface safely. Ascending once more, David Shaw would be forever changed by what he experienced. His dear friend and colleague, Don Shirley, would later recall that Shaw had become like a man possessed to return to Bushman's Hole and retrieve the body. After the two came into contact with Dion's parents, they reported their discovery, and Shaw is remembered as having promised the Dryers to return their son to them one way or another. Over the following weeks, Shaw would plan out the dive, hiring multiple support divers who would dive into the water at scheduled intervals to check on Shaw as he progressed to varying depths to perform the mission. With that in place, his plan was left exceedingly simple, at least in theory. He would dive to the bottom, locate Dryer's corpse, load it into a body bag, and return to the surface. For Shaw, Shirley, and the team, it couldn't have been any more straightforward. Yet even in the best conditions, they knew there'd be great risk. In spite of the dangers, they would arrive at 6 a.m. on December 8, 2005, to begin the mission. The water freezing cold and air just as frigid. In preparation, Shaw would mount a video camera to his person to help document the events. Little did he know what he'd capture instead. Diving into the water, Shaw would descend in under 10 minutes to around 870 meters and relocate the corpse. Situating the body bag, Shaw would begin to attempt to move the body into the bag, but when all seemed well, something unexpected changed the mission completely. Dryer's body broke loose from the sediment and began to float, his corpse rapidly turning into adipocior. Adipocior being an insoluble substance that's waxy and crumbly, being made up of saturated fatty acids, which the human body contains much of. If moving a buried body weren't grim enough, a now free-floating body would be leagues more difficult. Now having to work with two hands, Shaw would have to put down his underwater torch, which was connected to a waist-mounted battery pack by a heavy wire. Typically, if not worn on the waist for communication purposes, Shaw would place the cord over his neck. However, in the heat of the moment, he failed to do so. This would become a fatal mistake. With the camera documenting all that was happening, David Shaw would become entangled as he struggled to work with the stubborn remains of Dion Dryer and end up caught in between the line for his torch and the line for the body bag. This is where the situation took an unexpected turn, when, after descending to 800 feet, to see why Shaw had not been communicating his situation with his torch. Don Shirley's breathing apparatus had been cracked in two by the pressure, forcing him to return to the surface prematurely without any word of what was happening to Shaw. Now, completely on his own and stuck with the intense amount of work on his body and lungs, Shaw's situation was dire. Sadly, as he was trying to free himself, David Shaw would work his body to its breaking point and, likely also from hypocapnia, would lose consciousness from a buildup of carbon monoxide in his body. Without any immediate aid or way to recover, he passed away. 3 days later, when his team had assumed the worst and gone back to recover the equipment, they'd found out exactly what had happened. Both David Shaw and Dion Dryer floating lifelessly, 2 men sharing one grave. In the end, both Dryer and Shaw died doing what they loved, a fate few can also acclaim to, with David Shaw himself being survived by his close friends, wife and 2 children, leaving behind a legacy of bravery and kindness in his mission to return Dion's remains to his family, who never knew if they would ever see their son again. His story is a testament to all who would dare do the impossible while diving. If you enjoyed this video, kindly leave a like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.